Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started just because I'm conscious of everybody's time after school. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's hectic this time of year and there's lots going on, and so I really appreciate your time. Um, we are going to be talking today about our new science unit in P5, which is sound waves, and the cross-curricular approach you can take to teaching these standards and mixing in some of our literacy standards as well. So we're just going to introduce. So this workshop is being put on by us at the Bermuda Education Network. And we're constantly trying to find new ways of engaging teachers and working on building with some of our successful ways so far of getting our education community in Bermuda involved and helping teachers in the public system to deliver their classes effectively. So I'm going to hand it over to Tiff, who can introduce herself.
Good afternoon, teachers. My name is Tiffany Beans. Very nice to see some new faces. I am the P4 teacher, so I don't usually get to see the P5s, but I am the P4 network teacher for Ben. I am the P4 teacher at Purvis as well. So I'm here with you guys today because, sound is a new unit for P5, but it's been a P4 unit all this time. So just here to share my knowledge a little bit on how we've been doing it in P4. And I've been a teacher of the public school system for 8 years. I think I said everything about myself. All right, Flo, go ahead.
Thank you, Tiff. This is actually this year with our kind of change up and introduction of some of the new units in the curriculum. It's great to be able to talk to teachers from not only our year groups, but from other year groups, because a lot of the time, some of the things that seem really new to us are actually units that are touched on or have been touched on in the past by other year groups. So my name is Florence Brown. I'm a teacher at St. George's Prep, P5. I'm currently the teacher lead for literacy, and I'm the MTSS coach at the school. I have a background in restorative practices. That's something that's near and dear to my heart, and something that I've used a lot of today. But outside of teaching, some of my passions revolve around natural history and the environment, and everything that Bermuda has to offer. Our history and our environment is quite spectacular. So being able to draw on what we've got around us is something I really enjoy doing. But just wanted to give you a brief overview of some of the standards that we touch on in these lessons. So something that we really try and do a lot is try and tie it tie some of our science lessons into literacy and take a cross-curricular approach. One, because it's really good fun for the kids and they enjoy it and they kind of thrive by doing that, but also it helps our lives in being able to focus on one unit, but then also tie in some of our standards in literacy. There are, as we know, so many, and there's so much to get through. So where we can find connections that tie over, the better, because then we can say, okay, well, in this science lesson, we've used this inquiry skill, this science skill, and this writing skill, or based on what we're doing in science, we can take a lesson on that involves some of our literacy skills, and it's just an effective way of doing things. So that's a little brief overview of what we touch on. The science skills as well don't just involve the understanding of the unit, but also those inquiry skills that we try and slot into all of our lessons. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Hannah Horsfield, and she runs the expedition that I'm sure all of you are keen to sign up for, that links in with this unit.
Thank you so much, Florence, and hello, everybody. Sound Lab, so we'll be talking about sound waves. This is a very hands-on lesson. My name is Hannah Horsfield. I am the programs educator here. I think I know some of you, but if I don't, I'm really excited to meet you next week. The things, I just put the curriculum in that we'll be focusing on. These are the 3 standards. And then we'll be doing understanding how sound travels and vibrations. So I have slinkies, and different hands-on tools for the kids to use. I've made a bunch of sound toys. We have a low budget, but I've made lots of cool, interesting things to show them how sound vibrations work. And I ordered a bunch of these sound tubes. So we're going to be making lots of noise and seeing how pitch changes with different concentrations. And I've made a couple of these boxes. So we'll be talking a little bit about that with the students. And then also Chladni plates. So Ernst Chladni was a German, you guys will learn about it next week when I am also an expert on it. But we're going to be making these cool patterns. So exploring how he'd make different pitches and sounds, and the patterns would mimic that. And it's fascinating. So we'll be exploring a little bit of that. And then, of course, because I'm BWI, we always revert back to the ocean and real world problems. So learning a little bit about echolocation from animals, specifically whales and dolphins. There are actually humans that can echolocate too, which I didn't know, that certain people that are blind, people can train their brains to echolocate, make sounds and then take that back. So that's super cool. And then we're going to be learning a little bit about how the sound from vessels and noise pollution. So I have an interactive web page that we can actually listen to, like what a ship sounds like when you're underwater, what sonar sounds like, and just discussing a little bit of like the issues with that and how that might affect marine mammal migration and just the environment in general. And we have actually an echolocation experiment with like these tubes, and we'll be listening to sound bouncing off different things. And to finish it off, we will be talking a little bit about the speed of sound and watching some jets break the speed of sound. And that always gets the kids all hyped up. So I'm pretty excited about this. Yeah, and I really look forward to seeing you all and meeting your P5 group. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Hannah. I'm super excited because it'll be new. I mean, anyone who's been in P5 for a couple of years, and we've usually come to you for light labs, I'm super excited to do it. Oh, let me get rid of that. Okay, so I'm going to jump in now to some of the lessons that we've created to tie in with this. Something that I always find is really helpful is to use a mentor text, and in some ways a text to start to get the kids thinking, particularly bringing things like sound and things in science that sometimes seem a little out of reach, kind of to their level. So we have a wonderful book called The Sound of Silence, and we have ordered it. It is due to come in on Tuesday, but in the meantime, we also have the read aloud from the author. That's a YouTube link. So this first lesson is really about starting to get the conversation going about sound, but then also to use some of our reading skills about the actual text itself. So one of our standards that's constant and consistent throughout all units is to be able to explore explicit and implicit meanings in a range of texts. So we've got, to start off the lesson, we can ask what your favorite sound is and why. This is something that I think they don't often think about, and it was really interesting when I did this with my class, some of their reactions. Someone said the sound of a pencil scratching the paper, and I'd never thought of that sound, and I'd never certainly thought of it as something that sounded good, but it was really interesting to hear their take. And you can either do that old school on some flip chart with recording the results and post-its and things like that, or you can use the Chromebook to create a Kahoot word wall. And then we can do the read aloud. And this book is really lovely. It's The Sound of Silence. It basically follows a young boy who's moving through Tokyo, and he's paying attention to all of the different sounds that he's hearing. And he reaches an elderly woman playing an instrument, and he asks her what her favorite sound is, I believe, and she says the sound of silence, how you can search for the sound of silence. And then he's kind of on this quest to find silence, and he can never find it anywhere. And then he realizes that silence is everywhere in amongst all the other loud noises. And it's got a really quite nice message in that as well, with lots of kind of imagery based on the sounds he's hearing. So you can read it aloud and then say, what did you like about the story? What did it make you think about? That's a good way of getting them to kind of respond to the text. And then in their notebooks, their readers' notebooks, you can have them answer a few questions. I know something in my class that I've been noticing is something that the kids are really struggling in is actually writing responses in full sentences, like properly, like the old school way. We do so much other stuff now that I think sometimes bringing it back to who is the main character in the story? Can you respond to that in a full sentence? The main character of the story is. But then also some of those beyond and about the text questions that get them thinking about the text. And then something that we can do after, which actually lends itself well to a lesson further towards the end, is to think about the adjectives that they heard in the story to describe the different sounds and create a list and see if they can challenge themselves to add to that list. So other ways of describing sound. And that's actually part of our, can be tapped into part of our recording interesting and significant words for their own writing. And the second lesson is where we start to talk about our science. So this is where we're really introducing or figuring out where they're at in their understanding of sound. So the first step is investigate how sound, or our learning intention is to investigate how sounds are made by vibrating sources. This is one of the three standards that are linked to the scientific understanding of this topic. So what I did to start with my class was I just did a 4 corners knowledge harvest just to see where the kids were at. And I had 4 questions around the room. How do we make sounds? Where do sounds come from? How does sound get into our ears? How can we make different sounds? And I just had them do kind of almost like a gallery walk where they went to each question and they jotted down their response and stuck it up. And then we shared their findings and discussed their thoughts. And then to those questions, I asked what type of inquiry could we use to answer these questions? Because some of our other units, they're a lot more hands-on, and this one sometimes isn't that way. It's not something that you can do a quick experiment on the fly. So I wanted to get them to think, how can we test that? What would we do to test that? And they came up with some pretty cool responses. And then reviewing what we're to talk about how sounds travel, that air is made up from a mixture of different gases. You can see from our chemicals, our chemistry unit, if they can recognize any of those gases. And most of them straight off the bat knew that it was to do with vibrations, but reviewing that all sounds are made from vibrations and that there's different ways vibrations can be made. And talking about our voice. So a lot of times when they talk about sound, we're talking about instruments and we're talking about things that are used to produce sound. And very rarely does the voice come up first. So I also have a little video, and it basically explains how our voice can be a source of sound and uses vibration. And then so linked to all of this is a slideshow that you can also go through that has all of these different parts as slides. And then there's an instrument sort. So you can either just use videos of instruments or you can use actual instruments. But thinking about when an instrument is plucked or banged or blown into, what is it that actually is creating the sound? This they had a lot of fun with. I had like a xylophone and a little ukulele and a few other instruments, triangles, and they had a good time kind of playing them in their groups. It was loud, so sorry about that in advance, but it was worth it. They did manage to figure out where the sound was coming from, what in the instrument or on the instrument was vibrating. And then as either a homework task or a challenge task for those that might be finished, or if you want to set something for homework, is to research how sounds get into our ears. So that's kind of like the function of the ear, which isn't necessarily a standard, but it is quite interesting and comes up later down the line in their science curriculum in Cambridge. So it's good to get them thinking about that. And then there's a really fun investigation that Tiff shared with me about being able to hear certain. Oh wait, no, is that it?
Yeah, that's it. So it's basically a video. The children love it. I do it every year. And it's just explaining how sounds get into our ears. And as pitch changes and gets higher, sometimes you can't hear certain sounds, especially older people, you cannot hear really high pitch. So they just think it's so hilarious how they can hear all of these sounds. And I really cannot. So if you try, you can do it in class, or you can assign it for them to do with their family at home, and they absolutely love coming back and telling you how they heard all the sounds and their parents couldn't hear any of the sounds. So it's a nice way to get them excited about sound.
It's like a little beep test too.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
swear when I did it with my class, they were like, "You didn't hear that, Miss Brown?" And I'm like, "Are you
I can
tricking
only
me?
hear
Like,
two
I'm
of
not
them,
sure if
so
you're
I'm
tricking me or
concerned.
not." But that was really fun. And another thing that I also got them to go away and do, and it was just like an optional if you're interested in reading about it at home, was to think about different animals and how they can hear different things than us. So they came back in with like dogs and elephants and all different facts about animals and how they can hear however many levels higher pitch than us, or some animals that can't. So that's a good fun introduction to the unit. And then the next lesson is all about describing sounds in terms of high and low pitch and loud or quiet volume. And at the start of this lesson, there definitely was misconception about, they kind of thought that low pitch and low volume were the same thing. So this is testing that theory. And so through this lesson, you actually go through a lot of the like scientific method, the basics of it. So what questions do you want an answer to? Planning out an experiment, creating a hypothesis, so saying what you think is going to happen. And that's where they usually tend to lend themselves really easily to the word prediction, but it's where we start to be able to kind of throw in some of those more technical terms. And basically, this was taking a variety of objects, and it can be anything, and in their group, doing something with that object, whether it's tapping it, striking it, plucking it, shaking it, whatever it may be, and describing it in terms of its pitch and in terms of its volume. So what I did beforehand was I just took my own I think I used a pen, and I just tapped it on the table, and I said, was that loud? Was that quiet? Would you describe it as something that was like high or something that was low? And we kind of went through it together to model it. And then they took some of their own things. So they had like water bottles that they would shake with water in it. Just things that you have around the classroom is really the simplest thing. And things that they wouldn't necessarily think of that make a sound that do. Having things that are different materials, like metal things, glass things, plastic things, is also helpful. And then practicing how you can carry out that kind of test in a fair way. So making sure wherever you're recording your observation to the sound, it's the same distance away. So I said, if I tap my pencil right here next to me, or I send someone over to the other side of the room and they tap the pencil, my results are going to be very different. So you have to make sure that you're staying at the same distance. And then they just recorded using a little table, recorded their 6 items, the pitch, which they just said whether it was high, low, and then I had them at the end rate them. So I said, okay, now you've tested them all, because you can't do this before you've tested them all. Which do you think had the highest pitch? Which do you think had the lowest? Which do you think had the highest volume? Which do you think had the lowest? And then at the end, basically in the conclusions part, you want them to understand that there is a difference between pitch and volume, and that some things can have a high pitch and a low volume and vice versa, and to be able to describe pitch and volume in their own words themselves. And this was something that this was something they, at first, I think if I hadn't shown an example of something describing it myself as pitch, low pitch or high pitch, they wouldn't have got that. They were fine with the volume part, but the pitch part was something that they kind of wavered on. And I had to actually draw them back to that video of the different sounds, and that helped them to link it back to what pitch actually was.
All right, and this lesson is all about changing the volume and pitch of sound. So it's almost like the fun lesson, the hands-on experiment part. So they get to experiment with different materials, and depending on your class, because I know we all have different students and some things work and some things will just drive us insane. So depending on your class, you can decide which experience or how deep you want to go with this. But it's just pretty much getting them to know that sound is caused by vibrations, and if something is vibrating fast or slow, it's going to cause a different pitch and volume. So you can even start with something as easy as their zipper and getting them to zip up and down, slow and fast, zip it fast like this or slow, and understanding the different pitch and volume. And then in the main activity, this can be done. You can prep all of the work beforehand. Again, it depends on what type of class you have, or you can do it with them. So you can have all of the materials out, like their rulers, their scissors, their paper cup, their paper clip, their plastic cup, and get each group to do it together. Or you can just make it easy for yourself, have it all done, and get them to try the experiment by plucking the rubber bands, by smacking the ruler, just to understand the pitch and volume. There's also a really cool one that's not on this lesson plan, and it's all you need are straws, and that's really easy, getting them to cut the straws at different lengths and blowing into the straw to see that if the straw is cut shorter or longer, then it's going to produce a different sound. And then the discussion to get them to really understand what's happening. So how can the pitch of the sound be modified? If the vibrations are slower, is that pitch going to be higher or is it going to be lower? If the vibrations are faster, is the pitch higher or is the pitch lower? So just getting them to understand the relationship between the vibrations.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. And then the fifth lesson, this goes back to our kind of literacy point of view, and we use the ideas from The Sound of Silence to write about walking through our own community. So something that's really cool about this book is it's walking through a city that's totally different than where we live. So it's really nice to be able to draw comparisons on our like cultural context, and have them use words and phrases about the sounds that they hear in their own communities in Bermuda. So to introduce or to start the lesson, we can draw back to some of the sounds that Yoshia heard as he walked through his city and list some of them, and then ask them, are these the same sounds that we hear in Bermuda? And some of them very well may be, very few of them. We don't have trains, lots of differences. We're not in the middle of a massive bustling city. But it was really nice to hear them think about some of the sounds that they relate to as their home, and being able to say, why do you think it's different? What is different about it that you already know? Even if you don't know much about Japan, you can, from the story, identify some of those differences. And then what is really fun is to do a little game where it's if you have a beach ball or any type of ball, a light one is better, but everyone name one sound when they think of their Bermuda community. And so you can all go around in a circle so that everyone gets a chance, and then it can turn into a game. And once everyone's had a turn, you can keep passing at random, and if you pause too long, you have to sit. And so whoever's left standing are the ones who have come up with the most sounds. And then you have a really good kind of basis that they've heard a bunch of different Bermuda sounds. And then we did a little imagination kind of station. So imagining yourself walking through your community, creating a paragraph describing the setting. So a lot of times we focus on what we see, or kids specifically focus on what they see. And while that's great, it's good to be able to sometimes have a different focus. So focusing on the sounds that we talked about and being able to create a picture in the reader's mind. And this can be something that you can use also in other writing projects. So I know we used to talk a lot about, well, there used to be a unit that was realistic fiction with a cultural focus. Now we don't have that so much, but we can write it into some of the things that we're doing. So like creating imagery for our fables, for example, we can use it for that too. Also, a lot of times when we're doing, we've got Bermuda Day coming up, some of this stuff comes up as well. And then if you want to add in a little challenge, they can add a simile or metaphor into that description. And it's really good if you can show, so this mentor text does it really well because it focuses a lot on the sound. But I also said to them, a lot of the books that I read now, like All the Light You Cannot See, I don't know if you've read that. That's one of the most brilliant books I've read recently, and it focuses so much on sound. So getting them to realize that in real life, books that are written well do that. And then they can read it aloud and give some class feedback. So they can read out their setting paragraph. If it's just a paragraph, it shouldn't take too long. And then people can comment on what they think the person did well. Could you think of anything else to add to their descriptions? And not necessarily actual new sounds, but if they've described something where they could use a synonym, for example, or someone has a cool metaphor, simile they could pop in. And then they can draw an illustration that can match their setting description. And that can be something that you set for homework that they enjoy doing. Okay, so those are the basis of the 5 lessons. It's not a super long unit compared to some of the other science units. The lesson plan slides and the video are going to be or are put up on the Ben website. And there's also this feedback form below that you can click on once you've used them, or once you've gone to the expedition, or even after this share, to talk about whether this is useful to you or what you need, basically. Okay, well, if anyone needs anything or would like to get in touch, and we can share ideas, or if there's something specific that you feel like is missing or really challenging, I know I felt that a couple times this year with some of the new stuff, then my door is always open.
Likewise, and like I said, I'm in P4, but sound is a P4 unit, so please reach out if you need any assistance or some activities, fun activities. I certainly have a ton, so I'm happy to help.
And also keep in touch. So it would be great to have feedback once you've done this unit on how it goes, what went well, what some of the challenges were, if there's any particular resources that you liked or ones that you built yourself, or different ideas that we can add in, that will help. So thank you so much.